You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Welcome to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. My name is Marc Barber, Director of Content at Criticaleye. Today we're discussing the topic of the chair's role in succession planning, and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrea Gisle Joosen, whose roles include being chair of Bilprovningen, and she's a board mentor at Criticaleye. And joining Andrea, we have Adam Warby, chair of Ocado Group, Heidrick and Struggles International, and he is a senior advisor for KKR Europe Private Equity. So this topic of succession, I think it's obviously a constant issue that's of interest to boards, but we were reflecting on some of our research at Criticaleye that we conduct, and for our Chair and Ned research, it's one of the top priorities for the year ahead in terms of looking at leadership capability. And then if we look at our CEO research, our CFO research, the report we published for CPOs, it is leadership capability that's right up there in the top 3, and you can play into that sort of talent, which is obviously connected, and technology also one of the big areas of focus that we see. So we thought it'd be great to have a chat around that, so thank you for joining me today. The first question really is looking at why succession planning is critical. I think boards have a full inbox at the moment. How are you making the time as a chair to prioritise it? Maybe are you able to at the moment, given everything that's going on? And Andrea, if I could come to you first, and please feel free to build out on the intro as well. But yeah, what are your thoughts around this?
Well, thank you. I think it is a critical task for any chair to talk about and look at succession for not just the CEO but the top management layer. And if you don't make time for it, then you will be in big trouble, I think, quite quickly, because things happen in people's lives, in their careers, in also their capabilities, and because the company is also facing probably new challenges that you have to be ready for. So if you don't have a plan, then you are always behind. Even if you have a plan, it might not be the right one, but at least you have been thinking about it. So it needs to be on your agenda. I don't think there's any other way. You have to make time for it.
And how often would you say is it being looked at? Is it an annual exercise that's done by the board in terms of, are you having sort of maybe side conversations as well, sort of maybe something you're thinking around that?
I think in general most boards have a succession planning on their annual wheel as like a once a year kind of in-depth discussion at several levels, not just the CEO. But honestly, I think the board is evaluating the fitness of the top management at every meeting. Whether it's during a board dinner, lunch, or just private conversations, you see what's happening, the results, the plans, how they come across, what issues they're bringing to the board. You sort of evaluate that constantly and see, are they still the right one? Is there someone else that we need to think about? How quickly do we need to do that if you feel that there's a need? So it's not enough just to say this is an annual kind of thing. It's not a ticking box kind of thing. It's a real thing that you evaluate constantly.
Because it came through today, so we're talking from our Chair and Ned retreat, and it was one of those points that in this environment you can probably expect more change at that sort of top level as you're assessing where your business model is today with where it needs to be. So you feel that is sort of being fed into conversations much more.
Yes, and I think because the world is changing so quickly and always just faster and faster, you need to be alert on that. But having said that, you still want to have stability, because otherwise you cannot actually make your plans happen. So it is a balance. Where are we today? What do we have the right team in place right now? But you as a board and a chair have to think about, what about the future? Are we ready for the future? Do we have the people internally who could take over, who have the right capacity and capability, or do we need to look outside? And then you have to look at the strategy also of the company. What is the strategy of the company? How do we fill that leadership demand versus that strategy? Do we have the right mix? Do we have the right people in place to actually make that strategy come true? So I think there are more conversations around that today than before. I've been an ad for 10 years and 12 maybe. I think it is a more frequent discussion today than it was 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Adam, what are your thoughts around this?
Well, I completely endorse the criticality, and as you say, we've seen it in the event today. You ask a question, why do people say leadership is so important? And I think you very quickly get to the indicator that success comes from good leadership, and we've seen it in the stories today. One of my roles as chair of Heidrick & Struggles, we're in the business of providing this capability as well, and I've been personally involved in now 6, either as chair, as a CEO, or as a NED in 6 different succession exercises for CEOs, and they're all completely different. I think that's the other thing, that there's no cookie cutter approach to this. I think the sort of underlying success factor for me is this idea of an ongoing conversation. It can't just be annual, whether it's sort of happening somewhat in a natural rhythm around board dinners or more formally. And maybe the second point I'd make, particularly on CEO succession, is that actually having the CEO themselves lead on this, I think, is pretty critical. We just did succession at Heidrick a year ago. I'm picking up the conversation with the now CEO, and he's picking it up, and we're talking about that as well in relation to my succession. You don't want the CEO and the chair to be going at the same time. So I think making it a natural and time, a conversation that's ongoing, takes a lot of stress out of it as well.
Okay, and how do you frame those conversations? Because I just was reflecting on this podcast beforehand, and I have spoken to NEDs who, when I've talked to them about succession, have sort of flagged instances where maybe the chair's afraid to bring up succession with the CEO, which gets into a whole different area. But I just think, how are you raising the topic? How are you talking to them?
Well, I think it goes back to the early, but landing it in future talent, I think, and what will the business need, not personalising it. And I think, again, that tends to be a mistake. Quite a lot of conversations go down what do we do with the people on the chessboard, rather than looking at it, okay, are we going to need more technology capability? Are we going to need more global knowledge and experience? So I think that's one thing, is sort of depersonalize it a little bit and put it in the context of strategy and future talent needs, and then just not getting obsessed about timelines, because that's the thing that gets people anxious too. Now, you may have your own ideas of timelines, but it shouldn't be the sort of overarching nature of the conversation.
I think maybe just to add to that is there is always a risk that the company needs, obviously, another CEO, but there is the other side of that. Maybe the CEO wants to leave because a good CEO will be approached quite often, maybe with other offers, and you have then a different challenge that they are leaving too early, and then you as a board have to be ready. What do you do then? That might happen.
Yes, the emergency plan, and that's one incentive for a chair, by the way. As I was the emergency successor for a couple of years in one situation I was in. So you're keen to get off that list.
Yes,
there's an incentive.
Okay. Do you have a view around the preference for an internal successor versus external? I mean, clearly, this will be situational, but just in terms of your view. Do you have a preference when you're thinking about?
I mean, the data shows it's about 2/3 to 1/3 is what happens. I think most of the research shows that internal is generally more successful than external. So I think that's a good place to start. But then I think best practice says you always have to benchmark externally. And I'd say the third piece of advice I've had from wise people in this is always keep your options open. People will try and drive to a preference early. We've got a great slate of internal candidates. The internal candidates are useless. We're going to have to look externally. Just let the process inform the outcome.
So breathe, try where possible to give yourself a bit of time on it.
My experience is similar when I have been in processes of finding a new CEO. But I think the brief has to be quite clear. What do you need? Because sometimes you want continuity. You have a great strategy, you need someone to actually execute it. But sometimes you need a complete change. You need a turnaround. You need some new kind of competence because the world has gone from brick and mortar stores to online, and then you need to get in some new competence, for instance. So it is dependent on the situation and what the company needs. But yes, I think if you are able to find someone internally, the win is that they already know the system, they are having a platform with the organization, the board knows what they get, usually also a little bit harsher on the internal candidates than on the external. So you definitely are much, if you choose an internal candidate, you really want them because they really are the right ones, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on the profile point, and that's not always easy to get to because then people say it's got to reflect the strategy, and then sometimes you'll get into the debate, well, we're live in developing the strategy or the strategy isn't clear, so that can take time. The other thing your comment prompted was, again, the same person that gave me the advice on optionality said that in general, your external candidates need to be 2 times as good. Now, define 2 times, but twice as good as your internal candidates in order to make the call. I'm not totally sure how you measure that, but it certainly says the bar maybe has to be higher externally.
There's a question that we hopefully you've had a chance to look at around succession planning and how it aligns with an organisation's strategic goals. And sort of reflecting on that and the conversations today, it's moving so fast, isn't it? So how much do you look at that? I mean, you mentioned sort of maybe having more of a global mindset and experience around that or technology skills, but how much depth are you going into where you think of this is where the business is going to be 5 to 10 years' time when it's moving so fast? Again, I appreciate there's a lot of complexity within that, but I guess just some thoughts around how you're managing that as a chair.
I just reflect on my most recent experiences. I think back to this point on profile that reflects the strategy. What I've seen tend to happen is everything gets thrown into the profile, and you end up sort of describing this unicorn that has everything, and then there's another phase where you need to, and it can take quite a long time actually to really get alignment on what the real priorities are. And if I give a specific example, in the Heidrick and Struggles context, we're a publicly traded company. The board was quite clear that we actually wanted in this next generation to have somebody who had public market experience as a CEO. But it took quite a long debate actually was that non-negotiable, or was it a nice to have? And so my advice there would be, really spend the time getting alignment on the non-negotiables, the priorities versus the long wish list of for the unicorn.
Yes. Okay.
I also find that it is getting more and more difficult to have a horizon of, you mentioned 5 to 10 years.
Right, yeah. Well, there's a view, isn't there? I mean, although it's been said, you get these cycles
Yeah.
where it's like strategy's dead and what have you, but
Sure.
it's
But in
clearly
terms of-
fast moving. Yeah.
In terms of what you need,
Yeah.
as a board, if you want to make your analysis and, in 5 years time from now, we think this is the profile we need, that's almost an impossible
Yes.
task today, to be honest, with everything moving fast. And also you need the CEO's help to define that, honestly. So going back to your point of doing this together is
Yeah.
quite important, because the CEO and the whole leadership team is setting or proposing at least the strategy. And they understand this more than anybody of what the company will need. And whether this person is the right one then is then the judgment that the board has to make. Or do we need someone else further down the line, and what is that then? So having that very transparent conversation with the CEO, I think, is really key.
Yeah.
And to get there is not always possible, unfortunately, and then it's harder. If you can, I think it's really an advantage for everybody involved, for the company, for the CEO and for the board, because you make everything planned in a planned fashion, that everybody is actually able to move on. As CEOs are often good at certain things, but not everything. And it's not about doing a bad job. It's sometimes because you just need someone else with a different capability for the company right then. So it's just having that understanding and conversation, I think, is
Do you
really
think
helpful.
boards are getting more into that area around the capability beneath the CEO? Because ideally what you want is a leadership team underneath that allows the CEO to be more strategic, to engage with stakeholders and not be dropping down. Is that happening more where, maybe there's greater visibility, say, of the CHRO and the CPO giving information to the board to build out an understanding? Okay, so here's the top level executive team, this is what's underneath, this is maybe where our future stars are, this is where we need to be thinking about diversity, we need different skills. How are those conversations sort of coming through? And I appreciate it's a work in progress in a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I think it's evolving
Yeah.
at the moment, because I think it's more and more important. So I think it is becoming a subject, but it hasn't always been that clear. It has been more sort of like, this is our succession plan, and if he leaves, she can jump in, or whatever like that. It's really sort of just practical thing, not really taking into consideration the deeper facts of what are the competences, not just an emergency help, but who can actually run the business later on. And I'm working with one CEO who is doing it slightly differently, the succession planning for his organization. He is having conversation with the hydrogen struggles of this world, by the way, to say, in my management team, this is what it looks like. I know how to fill it if someone leaves tomorrow, but I want to know who should be sitting in that chair 3 years from now. And then having this conversation with headhunters, basically the whole recruitment business, to see, tell me who 2 to 3 persons on these key roles who would be right in our company 2 to 3 years down the line. So that to keep an eye with those people, get in touch with them, maybe nurture them a little bit, excite them about this company so they might one day join or not. But it's sort of a different approach.
Shouldn't a more strategic HRD be providing that kind of information for the business and then providing that to the board? Yeah.
That could be another way of doing it, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the role of the CHRO, Chief People Officer, is absolutely critical. The active discussion and assessment of executive talent, it can depend what sort of business you're in. Businesses that I've run or been involved with have all been people-centric at some level, and we have this corny phrase of people are our most important asset. And I've reflected on that before. I mean, every company is run by people, so everybody's got this same issue. I've been a NED for 7 or 8 years, only out of executive life 5 years. I just can't, if you go back to the point that all the leaders here in the event are saying leadership's critical, you've got to spend time on it. And I think for a board to have visibility is important. And I think the tools to be able to do that through the sorts of things you're talking, executive assessment, the data that exists around people and their experience are becoming much richer now as well. That's certainly what we're trying to provide as sort of leadership instruments in that world as well at Hydrix.
Okay.
I think, just to add to that, I think you mentioned the role of the HR or people's director, there are different names. I think they should take much more space in every company and in every CEO's ear, because that's where you can actually strategically early on form an organization in terms of capacity, culture, communication, development. And it's sort of, for a very long time, it's been sort of a side function. And I think it should be a strategic function, just like, together with a CFO, for instance. I mean, it's just as important. And I wish that would become a more normal, to put more emphasis on this function and let them have a little bit more mandate, actually, to help drive the strategy of the business in terms of capability, capacity.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's clearly, again, just the indicators from our research. It's talent, it's leadership capability, it's the people agenda, which then feeds into skills, culture, the whole thing, and it's got to be. I think it's the axis, isn't it, of CEO, CFO, and CPO/CHRO, whatever we want to call that title, but it should probably be working more in that sense. So from your perspective, you're not necessarily seeing that sort of axis.
No, if in mid-sized companies, sometimes the HR function is under a CFO still, which is really, you think that's not strategic at all then. It's sort of a supporting function, administrative supporting function, who are listening to what we can afford to do, not necessarily what we need to do. So it depends on the size of the company. Obviously, big PLCs have more focus on it and have come maybe further, but in reality, most companies are smaller, with less capacity, and the focus there is more maybe just getting results rather than focus that much on strategic HR approach.
Okay.
No, I completely agree. The role, whatever we may call it, is strategic. I'm very happy, having recently joined as chair of Ocado, that the CHRO there is really good, and she is actively leading in the people committee and has been a tremendous partner already as I'm engaged in my first, what must be almost 60 days now. But just it's a very personal example, and then as a CEO of a large global business, having a CHRO that was able to bridge the executive conversation with the non-executive conversation in a trusted way. It's a tough role as well. I think hard to find somebody that can really do that well and still be your confidant. So really a tough role to be in the middle of all those different stakeholders.
Yeah, the alignment piece around that.
Yeah.
It's easy to get isolated. Okay, just sort of quickly, just to switch it slightly, board succession. You talked about, Adam, you mentioned earlier on about actually sort of talking through your longevity as chair in a role. Again, I appreciate there's a sort of tighter governance structure generally around this, but is board succession talked through enough? And I guess thinking about the composition and strength of the board, given where the business is today versus where it's trying to get to. I wondered if you had.
Yeah, I mean, I've chaired a Swiss listed, now UK listed and US listed, and so they're all slightly different in terms of the actual governance structure. But I think the sort of unifying point for me is that a live and meaningful skills matrix and real conversation about composition rather than tenure, which can be the thing that drives it rather formulaically. What's our average tenure? Is anybody timing out? You've got gender parity has been a big and important topic, but I think where the conversation has lent from where I think it's most added value is really then saying, does the board have the right skills makeup to deal with technology, global coverage, people skills, strategy, whatever the business is in from its operational point of view. And of course, given that typically board directors' tenures are relatively long, you do need to think quite a long way ahead on these things, and it's different than executive succession in the way you think about the chessboard. How big's the board going to be? So it's more complicated than I thought it would be when I first engaged. But is, at least in the environments I've been in, has this skills-driven discussion is the most productive one.
Okay, Andrea?
I agree with all that, and I think there may be a couple of other things that you also have to think about is the mix of independents and non-execs and execs. It's all sorts of things. This is a really, really difficult chessboard, as you call it. I quite like the 3-year more in-depth kind of evaluation of a board, which is not sort of a ticking box kind of evaluation thing, but it's real interviews and someone watching the board, how they interact, because that's an additional layer to those competencies that you were talking about, which is how do we interact, how do we the respect in the room, the questions that are asked, how do we support each other and build on each other's questions so that you actually get to a better place together. I think that's quite important because in a boardroom where there are conflicts or someone who is not respecting the rest, you just don't get the full potential out of that meeting because it just doesn't work. So I think we need to pay attention also to the composition of the people in terms of people terms, that they actually can get along, that they respectfully are able to bring things up that are opposite to something else that someone else said, and have a good conversation around that. So that competence is one thing, all the other balance that you need to bring in, but it's really important that the board can actually trust each other and have. So it's a cultural point, exactly, with management. Maybe management is maybe less important in terms of the full board, but certainly the chair has to get along with the CEO. But I think that is an additional layer of complexity when you want to create the perfect board. If
it's
I may
relationships,
say so.
Isn't it, between the different people. So just final thoughts then. What and I think it might build out on what you said there, but Adam, if I come to you first, what do you think differentiates the boards that are really progressive in their thinking around succession, that are really kind of ahead on the agenda?
I think it's probably as simple as spending enough time on it. You know, it's really the difference between the tick box exercise and making it a real continuous conversation is fundamental. I think probably the second one is having a good process, whether it's driven by the CHRO or by external help, that it is informed. It's a talent strategy, and you're looking at this with some real data, and the conversation sort of is generative and it informs itself as you go along. So that is driven by a good process as much as having to have a continuous conversation. Those are the two things I point to.
And to add to that, I think would be to have the horizon defined, because at every board meeting we all try to be strategic and have strategic points on the agenda and all that, but in reality, if there are things happening here and now, that's what you're going to focus on, and succession planning is definitely in the future. So how to keep your eyes and ears open and say it is important. We cannot just talk about what's here and now. We have to talk about the strategy, the vision, where we are going, where we're heading, and spend time, as you said. Are we the right composition in management, in the boardroom, so that we are the right group, we are the right team to make this happen for the shareholders who have invested in it. So I think it's sort of a difficult one to sometimes lift your head.
It's a chessboard. Right?
And look further. Yeah.
Okay. Adam, Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you. Okay, as I said at the start, this episode is part of Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders series, which can be found on Podbean, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please do subscribe to our channel to be notified of new episodes. Plus, for more information about how to support chairs, NEDs, as well as senior leadership teams at Criticaleye, please visit our website, criticaleye.com. Thanks for listening.